my admissions essay, I'm going to tell all of you at Harvard why I'm going to make an amazing lawyer.
As president of my sorority, I'm skilled at commanding the attention of a room and discussing very important issues.
Imagine this, you're scrolling through TikTok and every other video is a hyper-feminine aesthetic. Pastel bows, soft pink blush, and knee-high socks. You see influencers whispering in baby voices, gushing over frilly dresses and giggling like schoolgirls. Then you realize these aren't teenagers. They're women in their 20s and 30s. Some call it coquette culture. Others say it's embracing femininity. But if you take a step back, it feels eerily familiar. For centuries, society has romanticized girlhood while subtly discouraging women from fully stepping into adulthood. From the Victorian obsession with delicate waif-like women to the 1950s Hollywood ingénue and the early 2000s Lolita aesthetic, there's a long history of making girl the ultimate aspiration, while woman becomes something to fear. But why? Why is youth marketable, while maturity is something to avoid? And who actually benefits from keeping women in a state of perpetual girlhood? Today we're diving deep into how the infantilization of women has shaped beauty trends, fashion, and social media. Because if you've ever felt pressure to be softer, sweeter, or just smaller, you're not imagining it. Speaking of solving mysteries, have you ever dreamed of being a detective, unraveling secrets, and diving into a gripping 1920s drama? Well, let me introduce you to June's Journey, a stunning hidden object mystery game that has completely drawn me in. June's Journey isn't just about finding hidden objects. It's an engaging detective story that keeps evolving. You play as June Parker, an independent, intelligent, and bold heroine trying to solve her sister's murder while uncovering shocking family secrets. But here's the twist. June doesn't have a badge or high-tech forensics. She relies on her intuition, wit, and people skills to crack the case. Each scene reveals new clues and secrets, keeping the story fresh and exciting. Plus, beyond detective work, you can decorate your own island, join a club, and play with friends. It's the perfect mix of mystery, adventure, and creativity. June's Journey is free to play on iOS, Android, and PC. Click the link in the description or scan this QR code to start your journey today. Who knows, you might just uncover a few surprises along the way. Now back to our story. Chapter 1. The Coquette Aesthetic and the Baby Voice Phenomenon. One of the most glaring examples of the infantilization of women in modern culture is the rise of the coquette aesthetic. It's everywhere, on TikTok, Instagram, Pinterest, flooding our feeds with imagery of doe-eyed makeup, soft blush, frilly dresses, and lace-trimmed stockings, knee-high socks, delicate bows, and ribbons tied neatly in soft curls. It's an aesthetic that romanticizes hyperfemininity and youth, leaning into the idea that women should appear innocent, delicate, and doll-like. At first glance, it might seem harmless, just another beauty trend, but when you take a closer look, there's something unsettling about the way it mimics little girl dress up. At its core, the coquette aesthetic capitalizes on the idea that femininity is at its most appealing when it's fragile, playful, and unthreatening. Unlike power dressing or minimalism, which convey independence and maturity, coquette style thrives on softness. Women are encouraged to dress like vintage porcelain dolls, embracing an aesthetic that evokes a blend of childlike innocence and romantic desirability. This creates a paradox. Women are told to be sexy, but in a way that suggests that they are naive, untouched, and submissive. It's a version of femininity that is frozen in a pre-adult state, one that conveniently aligns with historical expectations of how women should behave. The coquette aesthetic draws heavily from historical beauty ideals, particularly the Lolita and nymphette archetypes, which have long been romanticized in literature, film, and pop culture. Vladimir's Lolita, which depicts an older man's obsession with a 12-year-old girl, gave rise to the unsettling, sexy schoolgirl trope, which has since been repackaged into a more palatable, aesthetic-driven trend. The word coquette itself originates from the French word flirt, and in historical context, it described women who are charming, playful, and irresistibly feminine. However, the the modern adaptation of this aesthetic is deeply intertwined with youth, fragility, and submission, values that reinforce outdated gender norms rather than challenge them. And it's not just about fashion, it's about behavior. Enter the baby voice phenomenon. If you've ever spent any time on social media, you've likely encountered videos of influencers and celebrities speaking in high-pitched, breathy tones, exaggerating their innocence and vulnerability. It's a vocal trend that mimics the way young children speak, soft, hesitant, and overly animated. But why do women feel pressure to speak this way? The answer lies in societal perceptions of power and attraction. Studies in linguistics and psychology have shown that people associate higher-pitched voices with warmth, submissiveness, and approachability. A 2017 study published in Scientific Reports found that men are more likely to rate women with higher-pitched voices as more attractive because it signals youth and perceived fertility. This subconscious bias reinforces the idea that women should maintain a girlish, non-threatening tone to be deemed desirable. We've seen this vocal trend in celebrities for decades. Marilyn Monroe famously crafted her breathy, whispery tone a deliberate departure from her natural voice to enhance her sex appeal. More recently, pop stars like Ariana Grande and influencers like Belle Delphine have adopted exaggerated vocal inflections that make them sound girlish and playful. Even beyond entertainment, women in everyday life often feel pressure to soften their voices in professional social settings to avoid being perceived as aggressive or intimidating. The Coquette aesthetic and the baby voice trend are not random fads. They reflect much deeper societal pressure from women to embody a form of femininity that is non-threatening, playful, and dependent. The idea that women should be small, sweet, and perpetually young is deeply ingrained in our culture, reinforcing the notion that maturity is something to be feared or hidden. The trend may appear whimsical on the surface, but beneath the bows and lace is an unsettling reality. Women are being subtly encouraged to remain in a perpetual state of girlhood, and never fully stepping into the power that comes with womanhood. The question remains, where did the obsession with childlike femininity even begin? To understand the roots of this phenomenon, we need to look back to the 19th century, when the Victorian ideal of the perfect woman was built entirely around innocence and fragility. Chapter 2, The Victorian Cult of Innocence. The idea that women should be delicate, modest, and internally useful didn't begin with modern social media aesthetics. It has deep historical roots, and perhaps no era embodied this ideal more than the Victorian period. During this time, femininity was synonymous with innocence, modesty, and quiet suffering. The ultimate aspiration for a woman was to be angelic, pure of heart, delicate in appearance, and utterly dependent on men for protection and guidance. Any deviation from this standard was met with harsh social consequences. Victorian beauty standards revolved around the idea of smallness, both physically and socially. Women were expected to be petite and dainty, with impossibly tiny waists sculpted by tight-laced corsets. The hourglass silhouette achieved through extreme corsets was not just about aesthetics. It was about a physical manifestation of a woman's constrained role in society. A small waist symbolized control over one's body, one's desires, and ultimately one's place in a rigid social hierarchy. The stereotype of the fainting woman was both a cultural fantasy and a real medical phenomenon. Literature, art, and theater romanticized women as fragile creatures prone to spells of dizziness, fainting, and emotional outbursts. This ideal was so ingrained that women who actually didn't display these qualities were sometimes seen as unfeminine or unrefined. There was also a medical aspect to this. The combination of tight corsets, which restricted breathing, and iron deficiency, common due to poor diets, actually made fainting a genuine occurrence. But rather than seeing this as a sign of unhealthy lifestyle, Victorian society framed it as a marker of upper-class femininity. A weak constitution meant a woman was delicate enough to need male protection, reinforcing the idea that dependency was an attractive trait. Beyond physicality, the ideal Victorian woman was emotionally restrained. Expressing too much desire, ambition, or even laughter in public was considered improper. The phrase seen but not heard applied not just to children, but to women as well. They were expected to embody a kind of passive beauty, decorative, soft-spoken, and untouched by worldly concerns. This expectation was reinforced through etiquette books, which advised young women to be docile and self-sacrificing. Marriage manuals of the time warned wives to avoid challenging their husbands, as being too opinionated or outspoken could make them undesirable. The infantilization of women in the Victorian era extended to their mannerisms, dress, and even speech patterns. Just as we see modern influencers adopting a baby voice and playful, girlish gestures to appear more attractive, Victorian women were encouraged to carry themselves with childlike grace. High-pitched voices, delicate movements, and a certain naivety were considered desirable traits. Even fashion reflected this. Puffed sleeves, lace collars, and ribbons were common, all evoking the image of a childhood innocence. But what happened to women who didn't conform to these rigid ideals? They were often ostracized or demonized. Women who expressed sexual autonomy were labeled as fallen women, a term used to describe anyone from prostitutes to unmarried mothers, or even widows who did not remarry. This label carried extreme social consequences. In some cases, women deemed fallen were disowned by their families, denied respectable employment, or forced into institutions that sought to rehabilitate them. Literature played a significant role in reinforcing this binary of the angel versus the fallen woman. Novels of the period, such as Jane Eyre and Anna Karenina, often depicted women suffering the ultimate consequence, death, if they strayed from society's moral expectations. A woman who remained pure and innocent would be rewarded with love and social acceptance, while a woman who sought independence, passion, or knowledge was often met with ruin. These narratives weren't just fiction. They reflected real societal fears about women's increasing autonomy during the 19th century. The most extreme version of this control was the institutionalization of women under the diagnosis of hysteria. Any woman who was too emotional, too intelligent, or too sexually expressive could be labeled as mentally unstable and confined to an asylum. The infamous rest cure was a common treatment prescribed to women who were seen as overly anxious or rebellious. This treatment, which involved isolating a woman in a room for weeks with little to no stimulation, was meant to calm her nervous system, but in reality it served as a way to break her spirit. The obsession with purity and innocence wasn't just about social control. It was also profitable. The beauty industry of the Victorian era heavily marketed products that promised to maintain a woman's youthful, innocent glow. Skin whitening creams were popular, reinforcing the idea that pale, untouched skin was more desirable than the tan complexion of working-class women. Perfumes, hair treatments, and corset advertisements often featured messaging about keeping a woman's appearance fresh and delicate, much like how today's beauty industry sells anti-aging products. Even after the Victorian era ended, its beauty and behavioral standards lingered. The expectation that women should remain youthful, innocent, and submissive continued well into the 20th century and beyond, morphing into the Hollywood ingénue of the 1950s and resurfacing today in social media trends like the Coquette aesthetic. The idea that women should appear childlike, untouched, and dependent on male validation remains a recurring theme in fashion, beauty, and media representation. So when we see modern trends encouraging women to be soft, delicate, or innocent, it's impossible not to hear echoes of the past. This infantilization of women isn't new. It's just wearing a different aesthetic. While Victorian women were encouraged to be small in body and voice, today's influencers are encouraged to do the same through baby voice trends, oversized bows, and soft girl aesthetics. The tools have changed, but the message remains the same. The most desirable woman is the one who never grows up. But as we move into the next chapter of this discussion, it's important to ask if the Victorian era established the blueprint for the infantilized femininity, how did the 1950s take it even further? And why did Hollywood become the most powerful enforcer of these outdated ideals? Chapter 3, the 1950s and Hollywood's youth obsession. By the 1950s, the Victorian ideal of fragile, innocent womanhood had evolved into new but equally restrictive mold, the Hollywood ingénue. The post-war era brought a sharp shift in gender expectations. While World War II had temporarily allowed women to step into roles traditionally occupied by men working in factories, taking on new responsibilities and asserting their independence, the return of soldiers from war meant a cultural push to put women back in their place. The ideal woman of the 50s wasn't independent or ambitious. She was youthful, cheerful, and unthreatening, preferably in her early 20s, if not still a teenager. Hollywood played a massive role in shaping and reinforcing this standard. The most celebrated actresses of the decade, Audrey Hepburn, Grace Kelly, and Sandra Dee, were all known for their demure, girlish charm rather than assertiveness. Audrey Hepburn, for example, frequently played the role of the naive but adorable young woman, from the sheltered princess in Roman Holiday to the wide-eyed New York socialite in Breakfast at Tiffany's. Grace Kelly, though poised and elegant, was also framed as a delicate beauty rather than a forceful presence, and Sandra Dee became the literal poster child for teenage innocence, often cast as a sweet, wholesome girl next door in films like Gidget and Summer Place. This era solidified the idea that a woman's desirability was at its peak when she was at the cusp of adulthood, but never quite stepping into full-fledged womanhood. Hollywood consistently cast women in roles that emphasized their youthful inexperience. Even in romantic storylines, there was a noticeable pattern. Older, more worldly men would mentor and guide a young, innocent female lead, reinforcing the notion that women should remain in a perpetual state of being taught rather than being the ones in control. Actresses were often pressured to play younger roles, even when they had long outgrown them. One of the most famous examples of this was 26-year-old Olivia Hussey, who played a 13-year-old Juliet in Romeo and Juliet in 1968. While this film came slightly after the 1950s, it continued the industry's trend of making adult women play teenage characters, reinforcing the idea that a woman's beauty appeal are intrinsically tied to her youth. Meanwhile, Shirley Temple, America's beloved child star, struggled to transition into adult roles because Hollywood still wanted her to maintain her childlike image long after she matured. At the same time, women over 30 were practically erased from leading roles. If they did appear in films, they were often cast as mothers, matriarchs, or if they were single, a pathetic and desperate woman. A woman who wasn't married with children by her late 20s was portrayed as someone who had somehow failed at life. Hollywood's leading men, on the other hand, faced no such expiration dates. Aging actors like Cary Grant, Humphrey Bogart, and Frank Sinatra continued to play romantic leads well into their 40s and 50s, often opposite women half their age. The 1954 film Sabrina is a prime example. Audrey Hepburn, then 24, plays a young woman courted by a much older Humphrey Bogart, who was 55 at the time. The movie's romance, though celebrated as classic Hollywood, is emblematic of the industry's attitude towards women. The younger the better. And I remember watching Sabrina for the first time when I was younger, and I kind of thought it was weird. I was like, why would Audrey Hepburn like him? He's so much older, and I just thought it was weird and forced, to be honest. I do really like that movie, but I just think it's strange that he was so much older. And I think even in the remake with Harrison Ford, he's like way older again too. And another troubling development of the era was the emergence of the Lolita fantasy. Vladimir's controversial 1955 novel Lolita, which follows the obsessive relationship between a middle-aged man and a 12-year-old girl, sparked a cultural fascination with the idea of the sexy schoolgirl. Hollywood wasted no time capitalizing on this, adapting the book into a film in 1962 and later again in 1997. The novel, though intended as a critique of predatory male behavior, was often misinterpreted and romanticized, leading to the unsettled trend of sexualizing teenage innocence in the media. The impact of Lolita on pop culture was long-lasting, seeping into fashion, advertising, and even music. Beyond film, the marketing industry also played a role in cementing this obsession with youth. Advertisements from the 50s frequently targeted women with products that promised to maintain their fresh, young look. Anti-aging creams, girdles, to maintain a girlish figure. and beauty routines aimed at keeping women looking eternally 18 were heavily promoted. Women were constantly reminded that their worth was tied to their ability to remain young and attractive. The beauty industry and Hollywood worked hand in hand to reinforce the idea that a woman's prime was not in their intelligence, confidence, or experience, but in her ability to appear as close to a teenager as possible. While it might seem like we've moved past this rigid ideal, echoes of the 1950s youth obsession still linger today. Hollywood still prefers actresses under 30 for leading roles, and those who age in the industry often find themselves pushed to the sidelines. The ingénue archetype has evolved, but it hasn't disappeared. It's been repackaged into modern forms, like the manic pixie dream girl trope of the 2000s or today's Coquette aesthetic. Ultimately, the 1950s solidified a message that remains pervasive. A woman's value peaks when she is young, naive, and impressionable. But what happens when she grows up? How does society treat women who have aged out of this innocent phase? That's a question Hollywood and society at large still struggles to answer. Chapter 4, the 2000s Lolita aesthetic and its social media revival. If you were around in the early 2000s, you probably remember how the Lolita aesthetic dominated pop culture. It was an era that blurred the lines between girlhood and womanhood, glorifying girlish innocence while simultaneously hypersexualizing young women. The cultural obsession with youthfulness wasn't just about looking young. It was about acting young, dressing young, and presenting femininity as something soft, passive, and naive. This aesthetic wasn't just a fashion trend. It was a carefully constructed ideal that shaped how an entire generation of women were expected to behave. One of the most memorable moments that encapsulated this aesthetic was Britney Spears' Baby One More Time music video. With her Catholic schoolgirl outfit, pigtails, and knee-high socks, she embodied the contradiction that defined the era, both childlike and sexualized, innocent yet provocative. This was no accident. The music industry had a blueprint for launching young female pop stars, first introduced them as fresh-faced, naive schoolgirls, and then slowly transitioned them into a hypersexualized persona. This formula was applied to countless female artists, including Christina Aguilera, Jessica Simpson, and Mandy Moore. They were expected to remain sweet, approachable, and youthful for as long as possible, for their inevitable reinvention as more mature, sexualized figures. And I never really thought about this so much at the time because I was pretty young, but I do remember the Britney Spears video being kind of controversial in a way, and I remember a lot of people in high school like dressing up in that schoolgirl outfit for like high school dances, and Hollywood played a key role in reinforcing this aesthetic, repeatedly casting young actresses in roles that emphasize their youth, innocence, and inexperience. Films like Lost in Translation from 2003 romanticized the naivety of teenage girls in relationships with much older men, framing the imbalance of power as something poetic rather than problematic. The Western adaptation of Japanese Lolita fashion further fed into this trend, with its delicate lace, oversized bows, and doll-like silhouettes being worn not as an act of rebellion, as it was originally intended, but as a way to reinforce the infantilization of women. Gwen Stefani's Harajuku Girls era turned this into a mainstream spectacle, commercializing the aesthetic and selling it to Western audiences as something playful, cute, and desirable. Reality television contributed to the rise of this ideal as well. Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie became icons of the dumb blonde persona on The Simple Life, playing up exaggerated femininity, baby voices, and almost a cartoonish naivety. Even though Paris Hilton has since admitted that this was an act, the cultural damage was already done. The world had embraced the idea that young women should be soft-spoken, airheaded, and dependent on men. Whether intentional or not, this helped solidify the expectation that femininity should be tied to a childlike state, one where women were desirable as long as they were not too assertive, too independent, or too knowing. Alongside this obsession with girlish innocence was the troubling romanticization of the nymphette archetype, a term taken from Vladimir's novel Lolita. The novel itself was intended as a critique of predatory male behavior, but pop culture warped its message, turning Lolita into aesthetic rather than a cautionary tale. From film adaptations in 1962 and 1997 glamorized the novel's protagonists, presenting the disturbing dynamic as something tragic yet beautiful. The imagery of the sexy schoolgirl became a pop culture staple, appearing in everything from fashion campaigns to music videos. Fashion trends at the time further encouraged this infantilization. The early 2000s were defined by baby tees with glittery logos, plaid miniskirts, knee-high socks, and pastel-colored everything. Juicy Couture's velour tracksuits featured slogans like "Juicy" printed across the backsides of teenage girls, while Abercrombie & Fitch controversially marketed thong underwear to preteens with phrases like "eye candy" printed on them. Even Bratz dolls, which were marketed towards young girls, embodied a hypersexualized version of femininity with their dramatic makeup and exaggerated features and provocative clothing. The beauty industry was complicit in pushing these ideals, reinforcing the idea that women needed to maintain a youthful appearance at all costs. Skin whitening products, collagen-infused skincare, and lip glosses that promised a baby doll pout were all marketed with the same underlying message. Looking older was something to be feared. Women were encouraged to chase eternal youth, not only through their fashion choices, but also through their beauty routines. This obsession with appearing young and delicate led to the rise of extreme dieting culture, with tabloids shaming female celebrities for gaining weight or for showing any visible sign of aging. While the Lolita aesthetic eventually faded from the mainstream, it never truly disappeared. Instead, it evolved, and in recent years, it has re-emerged in an even more powerful form thanks to social media. TikTok, Instagram, and Pinterest have fueled a new wave of aesthetics that celebrate hyper-feminine, hyper-youthful styles. Trends such as balletcore, coquette, soft girl, and nymphette have revived many of the same elements that defined the early 2000s. Ribbons, lace-trimmed socks, baby doll dresses, and wide-eyed doll-like makeup. The modern resurgence of these trends makes it clear that the cultural preference for childlike femininity never really went away. It simply adapted new platforms. Unlike the early 2000s, where these trends were largely dictated by celebrities and fashion industry, today's revival is driven by influencers and everyday users who curate their online personas to fit these aesthetics. The coquette trend in particular thrives on TikTok and Instagram, where women pose carefully edited videos of themselves in soft lighting, whispering in breathy tones while wearing lace-trimmed lingerie. The romanticization of fragility is a central theme, with young women encouraged to present themselves as delicate, passive, and untouched by the harshness of the world. And the baby voice trend also returned, with influencers deliberately adopting high-pitched, soft-spoken tones in their videos. The popularity of ASMR culture has contributed to this, making whispery, breathy voices more mainstream. Whether consciously or subconsciously, many young women have internalized the idea that speaking softly and acting naive makes them more appealing. The more they embody these traits, the more engagement they receive online, creating a feedback loop in which infantilized femininity is constantly reinforced. The resurgence of the Lolita aesthetic in modern culture isn't just about nostalgia. It reflects deeper societal forces that continue to profit from women's insecurity. The beauty industry thrives on the fear of aging, selling everything from Botox to collagen supplements to anti-aging serums, all with the promise to preserving youth. Social media platforms driven by algorithms that favor visually pleasing and shareable content reward women who conform to hyper-feminine doll-like aesthetics. Meanwhile, the broader culture continues to push the message that youth is currency and that a woman's value declines the moment she begins to age. Although the modern version of the coquette aesthetic is often framed as an expression of personal choice, it is important to ask whether it is a truly empowering or just another way to keep women in a perpetual state of girlhood. The infantilization of women has always served a purpose. It keeps them easier to market to, easier to influence, and easier to control. If women are constantly striving to appear young, soft, and non-threatening, they are less likely to assert themselves, take up space, or challenge the structures that benefit their insecurities. While TikTok may present the coquette aesthetic as a whimsical, nostalgic trend, it's worth questioning who actually benefits from the resurgence. More importantly, why are women always encouraged to look backwards towards girlhood rather than forward into the full power of womanhood? If history has taught us anything, it's that the infantilization of women is never just about fashion. It's about maintaining a system where women are forever kept just young enough, just small enough, and just powerless enough to never fully challenge the status quo. Chapter 5. What happens when women age? So what happens when women step out of the realm of girlhood? The unfortunate reality is that society doesn't handle it well. While girlhood is celebrated, fetishized, and sold as the ideal state of femininity, womanhood is treated as something to be feared, concealed, and outright rejected. This is particularly evident in Hollywood, where actresses face an almost inevitable decline of opportunities once they hit their 30s, while male actors thrive in their 40s, 50s, and even 60s, continuing to land leading roles alongside female co-stars half their age. Women in the industry are often sidelined, cast as mothers and supporting characters, if they are cast at all, and the careers of countless actresses serve as proof of this harsh reality. Actresses like Meg Ryan, Winona Ryder, Cameron Diaz, who were all once box office queens but found their roles dwindling as they aged out of Hollywood's youthful, kind of innocent phase. Meanwhile, actors like Leonardo DiCaprio, who, won't date anyone over 25, so that's his own weird, creepy journey, Brad Pitt, and George Clooney, who continue to be treated as romantic leads well into their 50s and 60s. The double standard is glaring. For men, aging signifies wisdom and sophistication, and for women, it signifies irrelevance. The entertainment industry's obsession with youth doesn't just affect casting, it influences the way aging actresses are treated in the media. Tabloids gleefully dissect the changing appearances of female celebrities, speculating on whether she's had Botox or plastic surgery, and shaming them for gaining weight or developing wrinkles. The public response to these women aging is often cruel, reinforcing the idea that a woman's worth is directly tied to how young she looks. And the pressure to appear youthful extends beyond Hollywood and into influencer culture. On social media, women are expected to maintain an air of eternal girlhood, often through an exhausting combination of filters, cosmetics procedures, and curated online personas. Influencers who built their brands around beauty and lifestyle content frequently find their engagement declines as they age, unless they actively work to erase visible signs of aging. Many resort to heavy use of Facetune and Instagram filters and cosmetic enhancements to maintain the illusion of perpetual youth. The rise of baby Botox, buccal fat removal, and preventative filters speaks to this growing obsession with freezing one's face in time, often before a woman has even reached her mid-20s. Even in everyday life, women feel the pressure to downplay their maturity. Beauty standards dictate that women should remain youthful as long as possible, with multi-billion-dollar industries built around the anti-aging skincare and cosmetic procedures, as well as fashion trends that promote fresh and young. Women are encouraged to invest in different supplements, laser treatments, hair dye to cover up gray, all while men are praised for developing silver hair and distinguished wrinkles. The contrast is stark. While men age into authority, women age into invisibility. But why is aging feared? The infantilization of women isn't just about appearance, it's about power. When women are encouraged to remain youthful, they are also encouraged to remain passive, non-threatening, and dependent. A young woman is easier to manipulate, easier to market to, and easier to fit within societal expectations of beauty and desirability. Maturity, on the other hand, brings something far more dangerous: experience, confidence, and a rejection of the need for external validation. Women who embrace aging challenge these deeply ingrained societal norms. They refuse to be defined by their ability to remain young and instead redefine what it means to be beautiful, desirable, and powerful. Actresses like Meryl Streep, Viola Davis, and Julianne Moore have carved out successful careers well beyond their expiration date. Hollywood sets for most women, proving that talent doesn't diminish with age. In the fashion and beauty industries, figures like Isabella Rossellini, Mae Musk have redefined beauty standards of beauty in the modeling well into the 60s and 70s. Perhaps the real rebellion isn't clinging to girlhood, it's embracing womanhood without fear, rejecting the societal pressure to remain small and quiet and forever young as an act of defiance. The narrative around aging is shifting, slowly but surely, as more women reclaim the right to exist beyond their 20s without shame. True empowerment isn't found in trying to preserve youth at all costs. It's embracing the full spectrum of womanhood. So the real question is, society fears aging women so much. What is it afraid of? The answer perhaps lies in the fact that a woman who fully steps into her power, one who no longer conforms to this infantilized beauty standards or seeks approval through youthfulness, is a woman who is no longer easy to control. And that is a force more powerful than any other trend built around girlhood. At the heart of the issue, it is a simple but powerful question. Why is womanhood something to fear? And this infantilization of women has been around for centuries, evolving with each generation, but always reinforcing the same message. Youth is beauty, maturity is not. From Victorian ideals to delicate innocence in Hollywood, the 1950s, and Lolita aesthetic of the 2000s, society has continually pushed the idea that women should be small, soft, and forever young. Confidence, experience, and wisdom should not be seen as flaws but as strengths. So maybe the most radical thing a woman can do isn't to chase youth, but to embrace her age and her voice. So what do you think? Have you noticed these pressures in media and fashion? When I was younger watching Marilyn Monroe movies, I always did find it strange that she talks so like soft and whispery. I noticed a lot of other Hollywood movies, actresses did that. I didn't really think about it per se and what it was related to, but I remember kind of questioning, like, that's so weird how like soft spoken she was. Anyways, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts on this whole trend and the coquette aesthetic being popular right now. All right, thanks for watching.